So recently, I got an email from a viewer. Let's call him Nick, and trust me, it's a good one because he's asking questions that I think most men have in the back of their minds, but won't ever say out loud because, well, in 2025, even admitting you as a man have certain thoughts and urges and ideas will get you canceled faster than Babylon 5 at a science convention. Like, say, for example, if a man says, oh, I don't know, he wants sex and intimacy without all the drama, delusional expectations, and emotional landmines that today's modern women wallow in. I mean, let's face it, to today's women, any man who says anything even remotely close to that is somehow committing a crime against humanity. So join me as we answer the question, how can men get intimacy without having to sign up for a non-cancelable subscription of daily headaches, financial risk, and character assassination? All right, so let's dive into Nick's email, and just to be open and upfront, I have edited it slightly for brevity. Nick asks, can you explain this to me, Dan? What do you suggest for men who really want sex but don't want to have to pay for it? What do you say to men who want to be attracted to a woman in order to have sex with her? I get that it's probably not a very good idea in this age. However, there is a biological, physiological, and any other logical component to men that makes us feel incomplete as men without it, even if it is only just sex. But nonetheless, I do think it plays a very important health factor in a man's life. Am I wrong? He goes on to say, also, is it just me or does it seem like most women these days aren't really all that interesting? Oh, sure, they're nice, polite, but I do not find most of them interesting as most seem to have little interest in any curiosity besides who's having a sale and brain-dead reality shows. Oh, and one more thing, if I may. Do women really have no self-introspection? Do they not know that they should own up to their mistakes? Or does it always have to be, and I mean always, the man's fault in whatever it is? Do they really perhaps not quite understand? Dan, I'm sorry for the long message, but if anyone knows about this sort of thing, you do. All right, Nick. Well, first off, let me say thanks to you for sending me the email and thanks to you for the high praise. And I'll do my best to live up to it, although you got to admit you made it pretty tough for me. But you do ask some very valid questions, and ones, as I said earlier, I do think most men have these days. So we're going to break it down and go through them, starting with, what do you suggest for men who really want sex but don't want to pay for it, and who actually want to be attracted to the woman that they're with? And that, my friend, well, that is the million-dollar question these days, isn't it? You hit the nail right on the head exactly, and show why it's so important to answer the question, which is because sex, or if you prefer, intimacy, is something that men need. And no, they don't want to have to pay for it, or have it with women that they aren't attracted to. Physical intimacy is something men crave, something they are biologically wired to seek. Now, women these days, well, they say that's a bad thing. Hell, they even go so far as to paint men as predators, perverts, or obsessed, simply for having the most basic of human drives. You know, the one that has kept the human race going for thousands of years now. And let's be fair, that's not a bad thing. It's not something to be avoided, and it's not something that's toxic, which they all say. And of course, they go so far as to paint it as a moral defect that all men have. But spoiler alert, and yes, ladies, I'm talking to you directly. You are just as hardwired to crave sex and intimacy as men are. Oh, you may not want to admit it, but that is a fact. Sure, maybe it's not in exactly the same way that men are wired because we are different in some ways, despite all your claims to the contrary, but you're painting men as inherently toxic for having the very same drives you do? Well, let's just say that reeks of hypocrisy. Now let's go to another point that Nick pointed out, which is men do feel incomplete without intimacy. And he's 100% correct in saying that it's a health factor for men in many ways. There's the physical effects on cardiovascular and immunity. There's the hormonal health effects on things like testosterone levels, which in turn affects things like muscle mass, bone density, and overall vitality, especially as we get older. And then perhaps there's the biggest of all, the effects on mental health and stress relief. Now, those are just a few of the things that I could list. Honestly, I could do a 10-minute video on each one of them individually, but I think we've made the point. The point that is, men's health is directly related to whether or not he's getting some. That's not conjecture. That's not something the patriarchy made up to oppress women. It's scientific, biological, irrefutable reality. Then Nick drops the other half of the grenade, and one that more and more men are coming to realize these days, which is that most women aren't really all that interesting to be around. Good God, how the mighty have fallen, haven't they? Today's women, generally speaking, are insufferable, completely wrapped up in themselves, as they show over and over again in their silly little videos on TikTok. They genuinely don't seem curious about anything beyond sales, makeup, Insta-clicks, and reality shows. And as I often show in my videos, they never take a moment to self-reflect or take responsibility for anything when things go wrong. No, instead, they live in a fantasy world where they are perfect beings who don't need to bring anything to the table because, duh, they are the table. While at the same time screaming men are toxic, misogynistic, lazy, unable to do anything right, and, lest we forget, responsible for anything and everything that is wrong in the world. No ifs, ands, or buts. No exceptions at all. It is truly insane, and I have to give Nick credit where credit is due because he just described the dating and relationship scene for men in just a couple of lines. And that is the reality that men face. So what can we do? What should we do? Well, let's start off with the biological part, because while society and feminism don't want to acknowledge it exists, it does. And it is a key factor that cannot be ignored. Yet, women do exactly that, ignore it, which is pure folly. Because pretending men don't have a strong sexual drive, not to mention women also, is pure fantasy land. Pure delusion. And yet, as I mentioned earlier, men are hardwired for intimacy and sex. Evolution has programmed it into them for millions of years. And contrary to feminism's goal, you can't erase it in 50 years, though they sure are trying, aren't they? Sorry, ladies, but testosterone isn't a suggestion. Men's bodies tell them, hey, bro, go reproduce. Just like women's bodies tell them to do the same. You know, the whole biological clock thing that feminists are trying to demonize by claiming being a mother somehow ruins your life and body forever. And if you do ignore it for long enough, for both men and women, your mood, your health, even your motivation can and usually will take a hit. That's not toxic masculinity. That's simply human physiology. And it's also, by the way, why most feminists these days are so angry, depressed, and hateful of men because, well, they've become so toxic themselves, they can't get any either. But I digress. But here's where 2025 throws a real wrench into the gears. The cost of pursuing intimacy for men in this culture is no longer just dinner and a couple of drinks. Though the financial hit isn't something to be ignored, but it pales in comparison to what men face if they're dumb enough to date now, which is things like, will she accuse me of something tomorrow? Will she ghost me mid-sentence? Will she try and turn this into a full-blown relationship that I never signed up for? Or my personal favorite, will she use my desire as leverage for personal gain, trying to get anything and everything she can by offering the hope of intimacy with her? Sure, there's always been some give and take, always been some trade-offs and reciprocation. But today's women have tossed all of that right out the window. They want it all, demand it all, while offering nothing, literally nothing of value to men in return. Oh, sure, they'll make all the promises, they'll play the little game. But when it comes to actual intimacy, you'd have a better chance of finding Nemo. And that's exactly why so many men are tapping out. And Nick touches on it even more when he talks about not wanting to have to pay for it. Though I do need to clarify something for Nick and all the other men out there. You're going to pay. You've always had to pay, and you always will have to pay. Now, look, I get he's talking about the P word, the one I can't say here, but you know the one I mean. And yeah, I've talked about that before and said I'm not a fan of that and never would go that route myself. But I do get why some men do it. But let's be real about something. In modern dating, oh, my friend, you're still paying. Paying, in fact, more, far more than you would if you sought services rendered elsewhere. Maybe you aren't handing over cash, but it's still a business transaction because women have turned it into completely that, which is why you will pay. Pay with your time, your energy, your attention, your emotional bandwidth, and sometimes actual resources. Oh, sure, you may not be handing her a Chris Hundy right off the bat, but you'll be spending far more than that on things like dinner, drinks, flowers, and all the other things women list in their videos that they think they deserve in order to spend time with you. Hell, you're going to pay even if you never open your wallet for the date. Pay in drama, delusion, and never-ending increasing demands and expectations. And here's another thing. The free route, the hookup culture. Oh, well, my friends, many times, dare I say most, that ends up being the most expensive of all in the long run, because it's wrapped in layers of expectations, emotional labor, and hidden terms and conditions. And oh yeah, occasionally a little gift wrap package about 9 months later. So if you want intimacy without paying, I say good luck. You're either going to need a willing partner who's on the same page as you, or you're looking at a lot of solo flights and cold showers. Now let me go back to the whole women aren't interesting thing, because I do think that is so true. Look, there are women who are fascinating, ambitious, creative, curious, and engaging. I know. I'm married to one. And I have several female friends who are ones like that too. But the reality for most men is that finding them, well, it's like trying to find your G-spot. Sure, in theory you know where it is, but you're going to probably die of old age before you actually find it. The fact is, those women, much like us, are in hiding because, like us, they're sick of the whole scene. The whole scene created by other women. And you're not going to find them binging Bravo reruns at 3 a.m. And you sure as hell aren't going to find them on social media or Tinder. You're going to have to work. You're going to have to filter harder. And that means the dating pool shrinks by a lot. Combine that with the fact that the aforementioned social media has turned half the population into dopamine addicts who can't focus on anything for more than 15 seconds, let alone have a conversation that doesn't involve themselves. Yeah, I'm sorry to say, these days, it's become pretty slim pickings. And as for the question, do women have no self-introspection? Generally speaking, I have to say, no. Sure, some can, but most, you'd have a better chance of finding the Ark of the Covenant. Here's the uncomfortable truth. We now live in a culture that constantly tells women you're perfect just the way you are, and it's always the men's fault. As such, there's very little incentive for women to self-reflect. When you think you're a queen, when you think all other women are queens, and when they tell each other that they are day after day, why would you think even for a moment that they think they aren't? And let's be honest, when it comes down to it, women don't really care about facts at all, only feelings. And introspection, that's painful. And the last thing any woman ever wants to deal with is painful emotions, especially when they're caused because of her words, deeds, or actions. Nope, better to just blame men for it and wash your hands of any accountability. It's not something they want to handle, and I'd argue it's not something they can handle, at least not these days, especially in a society that hands women a permanent hall pass and absolves them of any accountability or responsibility for their actions. That doesn't mean all women lack self-awareness. It just means, again, you have to sift through a lot more to find the ones who have it. You know, just like women complain about having to sift through men for maturity and responsibility. Funny how that works, isn't it? So what do I suggest? Well, first of all, men, stop thinking in all or nothing terms. You're not destined to be alone, but you may need to accept longer gaps between meaningful connections. Next, You need to prioritize yourself. Build a life so fulfilling, you're not dependent on a woman's presence for your happiness or identity. What you might not know is by doing that, you're actually making yourself more attractive to women without even trying. Put it another way, confidence is key, and nothing says I'm confident more than a man who's achieved the goals he set out for himself. And if you want sex and intimacy without the emotional chaos, well, honestly, men, you need to take a step back. Stop swiping right on every woman you see. Instead, focus on the women who are clear about their intentions early on. Women who actually are strong and independent and willing to take accountability and responsibility for themselves. Not the ones who say they do, because in fact, those that say they do rarely, if ever, do. Because they're not saying they are because they're secure, but because they're insecure and trying to talk themselves out of it. A secure, strong, independent woman just is. She doesn't need to go around telling you she is. And yeah, man, that means passing on the majority who want the security without the reciprocation. And finally, understand this. Intimacy, sex, should be a bonus, not the foundation. When it's the foundation, sorry men, but we make dumb choices. And in 2025, dumb choices can cost us way more than any dry spell. We need to think with this head, not that one. The bottom line, you're not wrong for wanting sex or intimacy. You're a human being. In fact, it's one of the things that defines you as a human being. Not wanting sex, while not necessarily a bad thing, isn't the norm. But in this environment, you've got to treat your libido like a loaded weapon, one that's pointed directly at you. You for damn sure better know where you're pointing it, or perhaps better put, where she's pointing it, because she can pull the trigger anytime she wants and destroy you. And it only takes her word to do so. So yeah, men need intimacy. And no, that doesn't make us weak or toxic. It makes us men, just like it makes women women. The difference is figuring out how to survive it, because we have now reached the point where the risk probably is far greater than the reward. So while you may want it, you need to figure out how you might have to survive the aftermath. And these days, that's a bigger challenge than getting it in the first place.